I never expected silence to sound this heavy. The kind that settles between two people who shouldn't have anything to say to each other. And yet, somehow, everything that matters is hiding there. It was late afternoon at the bookstore, the hour when sunlight starts to turn the covers on the front display gold. I was stacking a new shipment of travel memoirs, pretending to care about the difference between paperback and trade edition. She stood at the counter, flipping through a book she didn't seem to be reading. Her voice was the first thing that broke the stillness. Do you ever notice how people buy stories about places they'll never go? It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. Calm, certain, like someone who had seen enough of the world to no longer need to prove it. I looked up before I could stop myself. She was older, maybe mid-40s, with hair the color of black coffee and an expression that didn't quite match her tone. Confident, yes, but softened around the edges, as if she'd learned to carry her disappointments with grace. I should have answered faster. Instead, I fumbled for words. I guess it's easier to buy the dream than chase it. She smiled, barely. Spoken like someone who's never tried. There it was, a gentle sting that somehow made me want to keep talking. She turned the page, eyes scanning lines she probably wasn't reading. I watched her thumb rest at the margin, tapping lightly as though keeping time with her thoughts. That was the first small electricity. The moment that didn't belong in a bookstore at all. We talked, or rather, she did. About the author's tone, about how good writing always leaves you a little lonelier. I listened more than I spoke, half because I didn't trust my own voice and half because hers carried that low, unhurried cadence people don't usually have anymore. When she asked if I'd ever traveled anywhere worth remembering, I told her no. I'd barely left the city. Then don't start with airports, she said. Start with people. They're harder to lose your luggage with. Her laugh came after, quiet and sudden, like it surprised her. I didn't know then that I'd spend nights later trying to remember the exact sound of it. She bought the book, though she'd clearly read it before. I saw the faint smile when she reached the register, as if buying it was more about the conversation than the story. Her hand brushed mine when I passed her the receipt. It wasn't deliberate. It wasn't long. But it was enough to make every other sound in the shop, the hum of the lights, the whir of the ceiling fan, disappear. When she turned to leave, she paused by the door. You'll forget my voice, she said, like it was a fact, not a question. I should have laughed or said something light, but the words came out quieter than I meant them to. It echoes in my soul forever. She stopped just long enough to look back. Not surprised, not smiling, just seeing. Then she was gone. The bell above the door rang once, and all that gold afternoon light fell flat against the counter. I stood there too long, still holding the pen she'd used to sign her receipt. I didn't even know her name. But that evening, when the store was empty and the air smelled like dust and paper and the faint trace of her perfume, I realized something I couldn't explain. Some people don't enter your life. They arrive, like a sound you recognize but can't place. And once you've heard it, the silence never feels the same again. I didn't expect to see her again. But 2 weeks later, she walked into the bookstore carrying a box of old poetry books. Donation, she said. Her tone was even, but her eyes, they held that restless kind of weariness, like she hadn't slept well in years. The box was heavier than it looked. I offered to help, and she hesitated. Not the kind of hesitation that doubts your strength, but the kind that doubts whether she should let someone close at all. Thank you, she said finally, stepping aside. Her perfume, that same quiet trace of cedar and something floral, stirred when she moved. We knelt side by side on the floor, sorting through the books. Her hands were small, precise, with faint ink stains on her fingers. She handled each book like a living thing. When she opened one, she smiled faintly at a note written in the margin. You used to write in them? I asked. She shook her head. No, someone I used to know did. He had this habit of underlining what hurt him. She closed the book before I could read the words. The silence after that wasn't empty. It was careful. I could feel the weight of whatever memory she was protecting. To fill the quiet, I said the first thing that came to mind. It's a strange thing, leaving your pain behind in ink. Someone else always ends up reading it. She looked at me then, and for a second, the guard she wore slipped. Just a little. Yes, she said softly. That's the danger of being honest, isn't it? Her laugh followed, faint and short, like she was embarrassed by her own sincerity. She rubbed her temple with 2 fingers, the gesture of someone trying to keep emotion in check. I wanted to ask who he was. I didn't. Instead, I watched the way she breathed through the pause. A slow inhale, a steadier exhale. The kind that people use when they're trying to put themselves back together. When the last book was shelved, she stood and brushed the dust from her skirt. "I'll leave the rest at the counter," she said, her tone cooler now, retreating. I nodded. "You don't have to rush off." She smiled, polite but distant. "I always have somewhere to be." And yet she lingered, just long enough for the quiet to stretch again. She traced her finger along the edge of the counter, eyes unfocused. Her nail caught a splinter, and she winced. Instinctively, I reached out, not to touch, but to steady the moment somehow. "Are you okay?" She nodded, looking at her hand like it had betrayed her. "It's nothing. Just sharp edges everywhere these days." That line stayed with me, sharp edges everywhere. When she left, I found one of her books still on the floor, a thin collection of Neruda poems. Inside, a line was underlined in blue ink. "I love you without knowing how, or when, or from where." The page trembled a little in my hand. I didn't see her again that day, but the smell of her perfume lingered long after the door closed. Quiet, like the memory of someone who had almost let you see them. The rain started before closing time, the kind that doesn't pour so much as whisper against the windows, like it's asking to be let in. I was shelving the last of the returns when she appeared again, a dark umbrella folded tight in her hand, drops sliding down her sleeve. "Looks like I picked the wrong day to walk," she said, shaking the umbrella gently. "You can wait it out here," I offered, trying not to sound too eager. "It'll stop soon." She gave that small, skeptical smile, the kind that said she didn't quite believe me, but didn't mind pretending to. She walked over to the corner table, the one near the travel section, and set her bag down. For the next half hour, the world shrank to the sound of rain, the faint hum of the old ceiling fan, and the two of us sharing silence. I made tea, partly to be polite, mostly because my hands needed something to do. She accepted the cup, her fingers brushing mine for just a heartbeat too long. "This place feels different at night," she said, eyes tracing the shelves. "Like everything's waiting to be read again." I wanted to tell her she was the reason it felt different, that every inch of the room seemed to lean toward her when she was in it. But instead, I said, "Yeah, it's quieter, easier to think." She studied me for a moment. "You say that like thinking's a good thing." I laughed softly. "Sometimes it's not." That was when her phone buzzed, sharp, sudden. She glanced at the screen, and I caught just enough of her expression to see the shift. Her shoulders stiffened. She didn't answer, just flipped the phone over and placed it face down. "Everything okay?" She took a sip of tea that had already gone cold. "It's fine. Just someone who doesn't understand what silence means." There was more behind that, something heavy, unspoken, but I didn't push. Instead, I sat across from her, letting the quiet stretch again, like a thread between us neither of us wanted to break. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere distant. Inside, her hand rested near mine on the table, close enough that if I moved even an inch. "Do you ever feel," she began, then stopped. Her voice caught slightly, softer than I'd ever heard it, "that you've said too little for too long?" I looked at her, trying to read the meaning in that unfinished sentence. "Every day," I said. Her eyes flickered, surprise, then warmth, then something almost like regret. She leaned back slightly, pulling the cup to her lips, but her hand trembled just enough to betray her composure. "I shouldn't stay," she whispered, almost to herself. "You don't have to," I said. "But you can." The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. The rain softened to a hush. Her phone buzzed again, twice this time, and that was enough. She stood slowly, gathering her things, every movement deliberate, as if control were something she wore like a coat. At the door, she turned, her expression unreadable in the half-light. "You make it hard to leave quietly," she said. I almost reached for her hand. Almost. But the door opened, and the sound of rain swallowed the moment whole. It had been weeks since the rain. We'd both kept our distance, Unspoken, mutual, almost disciplined. I told myself I was fine with it. That whatever had existed between us belonged to that single night when thunder disguised hesitation. But she came back. Not with books this time, not with an excuse. Just walked in, found me behind the counter, and said, "You still make tea in the evenings?" Her voice was steady, but her eyes gave her away. Too still, too focused, like someone who had rehearsed every word on the way there. I boiled water. Neither of us spoke. The air felt thick, like the store itself was holding its breath. When I handed her the cup, her fingers lingered again, but not by accident this time. She looked down at our hands, then up at me. "You shouldn't look at me like that," she said quietly. "Like what?" "Like you're waiting for something to happen." Her tone was gentle, but it landed like a confession. "I'm not," I said, though even I didn't believe it. "I'm just trying to understand what this is." She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You're too young to understand what this is." That stung, but not for the reason she thought. I wasn't offended. I was seen. She said it like she was protecting me from a fire she knew too well. We sat at the small table again, the same one where she'd once said books were dangerous for honest people. She wrapped her hands around the cup, even though the tea was too hot to drink. "I used to think connection was simple," she said finally. "You meet, you talk, you share something real, and you walk away a little changed. But this," she trailed off, shaking her head, "this feels like standing too close to an open door. You want to see what's on the other side, but you know the wind will pull you in." Her words hung there, soft but final. I wanted to ask what scared her, the falling or the wanting. But instead, I said, "You don't have to stand alone in the doorway." She laughed once, brittle. "You think it's that easy?" "No," I said, "but you're still here." That stopped her. She looked at me the way people look at a photograph they're not ready to remember. Something in her softened. Not surrender, exactly, just a kind of exhaustion that honesty brings. Then, almost to herself, she whispered, "You remind me of the part of me I left behind." The clock ticked. Somewhere in the back room, a bulb hummed. Neither of us moved. Finally, she looked up, meeting my eyes fully. Not as someone older, wiser, or untouchable, but as someone equally lost. "This isn't fair to you," she said. "You're looking for meaning. I'm just trying not to disappear." Her voice trembled on the last word. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. There was nothing that wouldn't break the fragile honesty sitting between us. She stood then, her hand brushing the table like she needed to steady herself. "Maybe we both should stop coming here," she whispered. I wanted to stop her, to say don't, but all that came out was silence, the kind that said too much, too late. At the door, she paused without turning around. "Sometimes," she said, "it's not the touch you miss. It's the quiet that followed it." And then she was gone. Again, leaving only the sound of the bell, and a silence that echoed louder than any voice I'd ever known. It was late afternoon again. The store was nearly empty, the golden light fading into soft shadows across the shelves. She appeared with a small envelope in her hand, folded neatly, edges worn. "I didn't mean to leave this behind," she said, voice clipped but uneven. She set it on the counter as if it weighed more than the paper itself. I glanced at it. The handwriting was familiar, hers, but with an awkwardness I'd never seen before. "I thought you should have it," she continued, eyes avoiding mine. "It's from someone I shouldn't have loved." I didn't know what to say. My hands itched to pick up the envelope, to read, but also to leave it untouched. She sat down across from me, folding her legs under her. He disappeared, left without warning, and I never got closure. I thought I could move on, but I was wrong. Her voice cracked, then steadied. She looked down at the envelope, tracing its crease with a fingertip. I noticed the faint tremble in her hand, the subtle furrow between her brows, the quiet tension in her shoulders. I reached out, almost against my better judgment. "You don't have to say it. Sometimes just letting it exist outside of you, that's enough." Her gaze flicked up at me. "You don't get it," she whispered, half laughing, half sobbing. "You wouldn't understand a loss like that." "I don't," I admitted softly. "But I know what it's like to feel seen for the first time in a long time. And to have that taken away." Something shifted in her expression, recognition, maybe relief, maybe fear. She laughed then, quiet and broken, like a lock clicking open after years of rust. I didn't know it would feel like this, she said, handing it to someone else, letting them see it. You didn't have to let me see it, I said. You just did. Her eyes softened, the wall around her cracking just enough for me to glimpse the woman beneath. You remind me of him, she murmured. The part one thought I'd lost. Only different. Alive somehow. I nodded, unsure what to do with the confession, unsure how to breathe through the tension. Her vulnerability was palpable, raw, but not theatrical. It was honest, and that honesty shook me in ways I hadn't expected. She stood then, slowly, taking the envelope with her. I shouldn't stay here, she said, though her hands lingered on the counter a heartbeat too long. I didn't reach for her. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I watched her, heart hammering in quiet panic, as if just looking at her could somehow tether me to a world I wasn't ready to enter. As she walked toward the door, she turned briefly, voice soft, almost lost in the fading light. Some things you carry, you don't know they're heavy until someone notices. And with that, she left. The bell rang once, but it sounded hollow, echoing against the walls, a quiet tremor that lingered in the air long after she had gone. I stayed there, hands wrapped around my own cup of tea, staring at the envelope she had set down, the weight of her past pressing against my chest in a way I didn't know I could survive. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about the books, or the rain, or the quiet store. It was about her. And that realization, soft, seismic, unstoppable, left me trembling in the silence she had left behind. The store smelled like old paper and coffee, the kind of smell that lingers in your chest and makes you feel alive in small, fragile ways. She came in that evening, hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, eyes scanning the shelves as if she were looking for something she might never find. I didn't speak at first, just watched her, noticing the way her hair fell over her shoulders, the faint shadow under her eyes, the gentle arch of her brow when she paused at a display. She was cautious, measured, as if every step through the store was a negotiation with herself. "Would you sit with me for a minute?" she asked, voice low. Not a request, exactly, more of a question to the room, to me, to herself. I nodded. We moved to the small table in the corner, the same one that had witnessed hesitant words, silences thick with tension, and confessions we'd barely allowed ourselves to speak. We didn't talk much, just shared the space, letting the world shrink to the two of us and the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above. I watched her hands curl around the mug she held, thumb brushing the rim, fingers flexing as though testing the warmth. I placed mine near hers, not touching at first, just hovering. When our fingers brushed, slow, accidental, electric, neither of us pulled away. The small contact anchored something unspoken. She looked at me, a half-smile tugging at her lips, and in that glance was acknowledgement. Of all the tension, all the words unsaid, all the quiet needs that had drawn us together. I don't know what this is, she whispered, not in panic, not in fear, just truth. I nodded, letting the silence answer her. Maybe it's just us. Here. Now. Her lips curved, relieved, and her shoulders relaxed, the tension finally unspooling. For the first time, it felt like she could breathe fully, without measuring every step, every word. We sipped our tea in quiet harmony, eyes flicking to each other only occasionally, letting the pauses speak more than sentences could. There was no rush, no declarations, just understanding. Mutual, earned, undeniable. When she leaned her forehead lightly against mine, I felt her exhale, a soft surrender, gentle and real. My hands found hers fully this time, fingers threading together naturally. No dramatic gestures, just the simple act of presence. The room seemed to shrink further. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the air clean and still. I realized then that this moment, quiet, slow, real, was more than any word could capture. It was acknowledgement, intimacy, trust. We stayed like that for a long time, hand in hand, foreheads resting lightly together, simply being. No promises, No expectations. Just the fragile certainty that this was right, here and now. Finally, she pulled back just enough to look at me, eyes soft, lips curved in a quiet smile that held a lifetime of things we'd never say aloud. "I'm glad we're here," she murmured. I nodded, heart steady and unafraid. "So am I." And in that gentle, unspoken agreement, the store, the books, the rain, the light, it all felt like home. We didn't need more than that. Because some connections, once earned, need nothing else to be absolute. It's been months since that evening, the one where silence said more than words ever could. I still find myself walking past the shelves we once shared, noticing how the light falls differently now, softer somehow, like it knows to leave room for memory. She comes in sometimes, always quietly, never announced. And every time, there's that same little electricity, not a spark of something forbidden anymore, but the steady warmth of a connection that doesn't need to shout to exist. I've changed. I notice details now that I would have missed before. The subtle tension in someone's shoulders, the fleeting glance that says more than a sentence ever could. I've learned to sit in silence without feeling incomplete, to trust that what is meant to be will speak even when words fail. She's changed too, in ways only the small moments reveal. Her laughter lingers longer than it used to, gentler, unguarded. Her eyes, when she catches mine, hold less caution and more recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that we've both survived our pasts and found something worth keeping here, even if it isn't neatly packaged or named. We've learned that love doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it's in shared tea, a hand brushing another's, the patience to simply exist alongside someone else without pretending to be perfect. Sometimes it's in letting the other carry their own weight, and in doing so, feeling lighter yourself. I catch myself thinking of her voice in the quiet moments, how it echoes in ways I never thought possible. Not because it haunts me, but because it stays, a reminder that connection is earned, not demanded, noticed, not forced. Some nights, when the store is empty and the lights are low, I replay our first conversations, our hesitations, our near misses. And I smile, because we didn't need fireworks or declarations. What we built is sturdier than that, something real, flawed, human, and utterly ours. The truth is, we're still learning. Every glance, every pause, every tiny shared space is a lesson in patience, trust, and quiet devotion. I know now that the moments that matter most are the ones that seem almost invisible to anyone else. The ones that exist between words, between breaths, between lives intersecting just long enough to leave a mark. And in that knowledge, I've found peace. So I keep walking past the shelves, watching for her smile, savoring the small warmth of her presence. Because some connections don't need fireworks. They only need a little patience and the courage to notice. If you've ever felt a quiet connection that changed you in ways words couldn't, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your story. The story is now complete. All 7 parts, slow burn, emotionally grounded, with evolving tension, subtle physicality, and a realistic resolution.